Connor the Hammer Malone, Liam Ghost O'Reilly, and Jason Fingers McGrath thought Marbella was their playground. But what started as a luxurious escape from Liverpool's streets soon spiraled into betrayal, bloodshed, and an international gang war that would shake the sunny city to its core. Marbella, with its golden beaches, luxury yachts, and endless sunshine, was painted in the minds of tourists as a paradise. The streets glittered with high-end shops and designer cars, and celebrities were often spotted walking along the marina. But behind the glossy image of wealth and glamour, another world was thriving. In hidden corners of the city, away from the tourist crowds, powerful criminal networks were quietly shaping the underworld. This was not the Marbella of postcards and holiday brochures, it was the Marbella that attracted Liverpool's most feared gangsters. For years British criminals had seen Spain as a safe retreat, a place where they could live like kings and still manage their business abroad. The coastline became known as the Costa del Creme, and Marbella was its crown jewel. The wealthy expat lifestyle made it easy to blend in. Huge villas with swimming pools offered privacy, while expensive nightclubs provided cover for late-night meetings. In this hidden playground, Liverpool's gangs found everything they needed to operate far from the eyes of British police. But what they didn't realize was that bringing their rivalry abroad would ignite chaos unlike anything Marbella had seen before. The arrival of the Liverpool crews was not subtle. They moved with swagger, spending huge sums in bars and casinos, showing off their success. Locals watched young men in designer clothes drive rented supercars through narrow streets, their accents giving away their roots. To many, they looked like ordinary tourists enjoying the high life. But to those who knew the signs, these men were far from harmless holidaymakers. Their presence was a signal that serious business was being conducted under the surface. Marbella offered the perfect cover for their operations. It was close to key smuggling routes, with ports that linked directly to shipments from South America. Cargo containers filled with fruit or machinery were often hiding far more valuable goods. Kilos of cocaine worth millions on the streets of Liverpool and beyond. Villas turned into headquarters where encrypted phones buzzed constantly, and cash flowed like water. Money laundering was simple. Luxury real estate and fake businesses disguised the profits. Marbella became more than just a base. It was a fortress of wealth and power for those who thought themselves untouchable. But paradise had its cracks. Wherever there is money, there is greed, and wherever there is power, there is violence. The Liverpool gangs brought with them the rivalries of home. Old grudges were carried across the sea. Men who once fought on Merseyside streets now eyed each other across Marbella's nightclubs and marinas. The city that had promised a new beginning quickly became the stage for an old and bloody drama. Behind the palm trees and beach bars, tensions simmered, waiting for the moment to explode. Tourists sipping cocktails by the shore had no idea that deals worth millions were being made just a few streets away. They did not see the late-night convoys of blacked-out cars climbing into the hills, or the quiet exchanges of bags at deserted petrol stations. Marbella was a paradise on the surface, but beneath it, Liverpool's Gangland Madness had already begun to spread its shadow. The Liverpool crews, who found themselves in Marbella, were not simply holidaymakers living the high life. They were men with plans, ambition, and ruthless determination to build empires far from the streets of Merseyside. Marbella was not chosen by accident. It was the ideal hub where drug routes from South America connected with the demand across Europe. Here, the gangs could operate in luxury, keeping one foot in Liverpool while spreading their influence abroad. They invested heavily in connections, forming alliances with local criminals and corrupt businessmen who could make their operations run smoothly. One crew had risen quickly, led by a handful of young men who had grown up in tough neighborhoods in Liverpool. Their backgrounds were modest, their beginnings steeped in petty crime, but their ambitions stretched far beyond the limits of their city. They had already taken control of several key cocaine routes into the UK, and Marbella offered them the space to grow into something bigger. Their money was laundered through bars, clubs, and property deals, giving the appearance of legitimate wealth. On the surface they looked like successful entrepreneurs enjoying the fruits of their labor. In reality, every penny came from a carefully constructed empire of drugs, intimidation and fear. But the Liverpool underworld was not united. While one group sought to expand, others followed closely behind. Rival gangs, equally determined and equally violent, set up their own bases in the same Spanish city. What began as quiet coexistence soon turned into an invisible battle for dominance. Marbella was large, but not large enough for everyone to share without conflict. Every nightclub door, every port connection, every corrupt official became a piece of territory to be controlled. When one crew made a move, the others saw it as a challenge, and grudges that had once been confined to Liverpool's estates now played out on foreign soil. The money was vast, and with it came arrogance. Villas were bought in cash, sports cars paraded along the streets, and nights in Marbella's most exclusive clubs ended with bills of tens of thousands of euros. The extravagance was more than just indulgence, it was a statement of power. Each crew wanted to show they were the dominant force, but with every display of wealth, jealousy grew stronger. Even within the same gang, loyalties began to shift, as some members questioned why others were getting more than their fair share. The drug empire itself was built on fragile foundations. Cocaine shipments moved through dangerous networks, relying on trust that could never truly be guaranteed. South American suppliers demanded discipline and loyalty, while European distributors expected flawless delivery. One mistake could mean millions lost. The Liverpool crews carried the constant pressure of keeping everyone satisfied while protecting their own profits. Beneath the glossy surface of Marbella's glamour, the seeds of conflict were firmly planted. Each gang believed it had the right to control the city's hidden empire. But in their greed, they overlooked one truth: power was temporary, and betrayal was inevitable. What had started as a dream of wealth and control would soon unravel into paranoia, violence, and blood. The tension that had been quietly building in Marbella finally burst into the open one warm summer night. The city was buzzing with tourists, music spilling out of packed bars, and expensive cars crawling along the famous Golden Mile. Beneath the surface of laughter and flashing lights, rivalries simmered. Members of two Liverpool gangs found themselves in the same exclusive nightclub, a place usually known for champagne bottles and celebrity sightings. That night, however, it became the setting for violence that would change everything. It started with a heated argument over territory and money. Voices were raised, insults thrown, and in the charged atmosphere of flashing lights and pounding music, tempers boiled over. Security tried to calm things down, but these men were not the kind to back away. Their disputes had been carried across the sea, and here in Marbella, pride was as valuable as money. One wrong word was enough to tip the balance. The fight spilled out into the street, drawing the attention of both partygoers and locals, who had no idea who these men really were. Outside, under the glow of neon signs, the first blood of the feud was drawn. A young man, barely in his 20s and known to be connected to one of the Liverpool crews, was shot in the leg. The attack was swift, carried out with chilling precision. The gunman disappeared into the night, leaving chaos in his wake. People screamed and ran, cars screeched as drivers tried to escape, and within moments the glamorous setting had turned into a crime scene. The victim survived, but the message was clear. Marbella was no longer just a playground for the rich. It had become a battlefield. News of the shooting spread quickly through the underworld. Phones buzzed with whispers, and rival crews interpreted the attack as the beginning of open warfare. No longer were the disputes hidden in shadows or behind closed villa doors. Violence had spilled onto the streets, visible for all to see. Spanish police, already suspicious of the influx of British criminals, now had evidence that something much darker was unfolding in their city. Tourists might have dismissed the incident as a random attack, but investigators knew it was a sign of Gangland Madness taking root. For the gangs, the shooting was more than an act of violence. It was a declaration. Old grudges that had started years earlier in Liverpool housing estates were being replayed under the Spanish sun. Marbella, with its glittering coastline and luxury lifestyle, was no longer just a safe haven, it had become the new front line for an old war. Each crew felt compelled to respond, to prove they were not weak, to show that they controlled the city. Retaliation was expected, and in the criminal world, silence was seen as surrender. The incident outside the nightclub marked a turning point. Marbella's image as a paradise began to fade, lit by fear and suspicion. Locals who once welcomed wealthy foreigners now whispered about the Scousers who brought danger to their streets. Tourists who had come for parties unknowingly shared the same venues as dangerous men plotting revenge. The first blood had been spilled, and it would not be the last. What followed was a spiral of violence that would drag Marbella deeper into the shadows. The nightclub shooting had shaken Marbella's criminal underworld, but the real danger was yet to come. Beneath the surface of violence and bravado, money was flowing faster than ever. Cocaine shipments were arriving through secret ports, hidden inside fruit containers, and passing quickly into the hands of distributors across Europe. Millions of euros changed hands in a matter of days. For a while, it looked like the Liverpool gangs were untouchable, but power built on greed always comes with cracks, and soon betrayal began to eat away at the empire from within. The men who had once sworn loyalty to their leaders started to question their place. Some felt they deserved a bigger cut of the profits. Others envied the flashy lifestyles of those at the top, who drove Lamborghinis while their soldiers risked prison or death for far less. Whispers of discontent spread quietly in bars and private villas. Suspicion grew stronger with each passing week, and trust became fragile. In a world where money meant survival, loyalty was just another currency to be traded. The turning point came when one trusted insider made a decision that would change everything. Tired of being overlooked and desperate for power, he began secretly feeding information to a rival crew. At first it was small details, which nightclub his own gang preferred, which villa they used for meetings, and where shipments were stored before distribution. But soon, the leaks became deadly. Every move the gang made seemed to be anticipated. Every plan intercepted. No one could understand how rivals were always one step ahead. The betrayal was silent, but devastating. Inside the gangs, paranoia took hold. Fingers were pointed, accusations were thrown, and once solid friendships began to fracture. Men who had grown up together now looked at each other with suspicion. Meetings turned hostile, arguments broke out, and the leaders struggled to maintain control. While they fought among themselves, rivals grew stronger, using the insiders' secrets to strike blows at exactly the right moments. Marbella's underworld was no longer a united force, it was a powder keg waiting to explode. At the same time, the money kept flowing, and with it came reckless decisions. Lavish parties were thrown in hillside villas, with drugs, alcohol, and expensive entertainment. But behind the smiles and celebrations, there was always tension. Men checked their phones constantly, waiting for news of attacks, arrests, or betrayals. Every laugh carried an edge of fear, every handshake the possibility of a knife in the back. The glamour of Marbella was only a mask, hiding a growing storm that threatened to consume everyone involved. The betrayal was not yet known to the leaders, but its effects were becoming clear. Every failed deal, every surprise attack, pointed to someone on the inside. The gangs did not realize how close they were to total collapse. For them, the empire they had built in Marbella was still a symbol of power. In reality, it was already falling apart from the inside, and soon the truth would come crashing down with violent consequences. The hills above Marbella were dotted with luxury villas, each hidden behind tall walls, palm-lined driveways, and heavy iron gates. From the outside, they looked like private retreats for wealthy holidaymakers, but many were far more than that. They were strongholds where criminal empires were planned and protected. One such villa became the stage for a night of terror that would change the course of Liverpool's gangland war abroad. Inside, the mood was relaxed. A group of men from one of the Liverpool gangs gathered for what was supposed to be a celebration. A shipment had arrived safely, millions had been secured, and the leaders wanted to reward their soldiers. Expensive alcohol flowed freely, music shook the walls, and the atmosphere carried the arrogance of men who believed they were untouchable. Expensive cars lined the driveway, and the glow of the pool reflected off the surrounding glass windows. But outside the walls, danger was already closing in. The betrayal that had been festering within the gang finally came to life. Information about the villa party had been passed to their rivals, exact details of who would be there, how many men were armed, and even the best time to strike had been handed over by the insider, who had been playing both sides. The rivals, masked and heavily armed, prepared for an ambush that would send shockwaves through Marbella's underworld. Just after midnight, the silence of the hills was shattered. A convoy of blacked-out vehicles rolled to a stop near the villa. The masked men moved quickly, scaling walls, smashing gates, and storming the property with weapons drawn. The celebration inside turned instantly into chaos. Gunshots tore through the night, glass shattered, and screams echoed across the hillside. In seconds, the villa was transformed from a place of luxury into a war zone. 2 men were killed instantly, caught in the crossfire with no chance to escape. Others scrambled for safety, diving behind furniture or leaping into the swimming pool in a desperate attempt to survive. Some managed to flee into the surrounding gardens, stumbling through the darkness as bullets whizzed past them. The attackers showed no mercy. Their mission was not only to kill but also to humiliate, to prove that no one in Marbella was beyond reach. The aftermath was shocking even by the violent standards of gangland life. Blood stained the marble floors, bullet holes scarred the walls, and the once celebratory villa now stood as a symbol of defeat. Survivors carried the trauma in silence, knowing they had been betrayed but unable to identify the traitor. The attackers disappeared as quickly as they had arrived, leaving behind only fear and devastation. Word of the ambush spread fast. Within hours, Marbella's nightclubs, marinas, and backstreets were buzzing with the news. The Scouse gangs, who had thought themselves invincible, were suddenly vulnerable. Their enemies had struck deep, using information that could only have come from within. Suspicion and paranoia consumed the survivors. Everyone was a suspect, and trust was shattered beyond repair. For the police, the ambush was proof of what they had suspected all along. Marbella was not just a glamorous resort, but a battlefield where British gangs waged war. For the criminals, it was a brutal reminder that no amount of money, no villa, and no wall could keep them safe from betrayal. The villa ambush sent shockwaves through Marbella, and Spanish authorities knew they could no longer wait. For months, they had been quietly monitoring the influx of British gangs. But the violence of that night offered them the perfect reason to act. Police units, already coordinating with detectives in Liverpool and London, began to tighten the net, tracking every lead, every movement, and every transaction linked to the Scouse criminals. Surveillance teams were deployed across the city, from the glittering streets of the Golden Mile to the quiet hillsides where villas hid in shadow. Each gang member became a target. Their phones were traced, conversations monitored, and vehicles followed. The information gathered was painstakingly pieced together to map the complex web of loyalty, betrayal, and violence. Investigators discovered encrypted phones, secret meeting points, and hidden stashes of cash. Every detail revealed more about the gang's operations: drug shipments, money laundering schemes, and planned retaliations. Marbella's nightlife, once filled with carefree tourists and local revelers, had become a carefully monitored stage for criminal activity. The net was not just in Marbella. Detectives in the UK were working alongside Spanish authorities to track the gang's movements across Europe. Liverpool crews relied on constant communication to manage their empire, and these lines were now being intercepted. Every phone call, message, and clandestine meeting became a potential clue. Spanish police, in coordination with UK forces, started mapping the chain of command within the gangs, identifying not only leaders but also those willing to betray their own. The insider who had fed information to rival crews now became a critical piece in the unfolding investigation. Pressure mounted as the gangs realized they were being watched. Every step was measured with caution. Simple actions, like traveling between villas or attending nightclubs, now carried the risk of exposure. Men who had once roamed freely under Marbella's sun were now hyper-aware, constantly scanning for signs of surveillance. Paranoia spread. Loyalty became suspect. Trust, already fractured by betrayal, began to crumble further under the weight of police scrutiny. The investigators also focused on financial records, following the trail of cash that had been laundered through luxury properties, clubs, and businesses. Every suspicious transaction, no matter how small, was examined. Villas were bugged, cars were tracked, and once hidden meetings were recorded. The strategy was slow, methodical, and relentless, designed to dismantle the gangs from the top down. The police knew that patience would pay off. A single slip could unravel months of criminal planning. By the time dawn raids were being planned, the authorities had a clear picture of the Scouse networks in Marbella. They knew where shipments were stored, who controlled which territories, and which men were most dangerous. The ambush, brutal as it had been, had inadvertently provided the law enforcement agencies with the intelligence they needed. Marbella's gangland, built on violence and secrecy, was now exposed to the light of justice. The tightening net created fear among the gangs. For the first time, the Liverpool criminals felt the consequences of their actions outside the familiar streets of Liverpool. Their empire, so carefully built in Marbella, was now vulnerable to one coordinated strike. The city that had promised safety and wealth had become a trap, and every step forward risked leading them further into a web of arrest, exposure, and destruction. The raids began before sunrise, when Marbella was still quiet and the streets empty of tourists. Heavily armed police units moved in with precision, their movements coordinated down to the last detail. Villas that had once been symbols of wealth and power for the Liverpool gangs were suddenly surrounded by law enforcement. Gates were forced open, alarms triggered, and inside, the remnants of the gang's lavish lifestyle were exposed. Stacks of cash, high-end weapons, encrypted phones, and evidence of drug trafficking. The luxurious paradise that had shielded criminals for so long was now their prison. Teams simultaneously struck in multiple locations, not just in Marbella, but across Spain and the UK. In Barcelona, cars were tracked to hidden garages where drugs were stored, while in Liverpool, detectives arrested crew members who had been managing operations from afar. The raids were swift, calculated, and unstoppable. Men who had felt untouchable under the Spanish sun were now caught off guard, their carefully orchestrated empire collapsing in real time. Some were arrested in their beds, others while attempting to flee through side streets or hillsides. Panic replaced arrogance, and the luxury cars that had once been a symbol of power were left abandoned as evidence. Inside the villas, the aftermath was devastating. Investigators found not only cash and drugs, but also falsified documents, fake passports, and ledgers detailing the flow of millions of euros. Each item told a story of meticulous planning and ruthless ambition. The officers documented everything, building a case that would connect crimes across two countries. Surveillance footage, intercepted communications, and eyewitness testimony painted a detailed picture of the gang's operations. What had once been invisible under the glamorous facade of Marbella was now laid bare. The arrests shook the underworld to its core. The gang members had relied on secrecy, fear, and intimidation to maintain control, but the coordinated raids showed them that no empire, no matter how well built, was immune to law enforcement. Survivors were interrogated, alliances began to fracture, and suspicions of betrayal resurfaced. Men who had escaped the initial ambush now faced the consequences of their entire criminal lifestyle. Those who had once commanded fear now faced the reality of incarceration and public exposure. Across Europe, the takedown sent a message. Criminal networks realized that borders offered no protection, and that sophisticated coordination between international police forces could dismantle even the most entrenched organizations. Marbella's sun-soaked streets had been the perfect cover, but the raids demonstrated that no place was truly untouchable. The Liverpool crew's dream of a criminal empire abroad had been shattered, leaving only the remnants of their violence and the memory of their ambition. By the end of the day, the villas were empty, the streets quiet, and Marbella's underworld exposed to the sunlight in a way it had never been before. Police seized not only the assets, but also the sense of invincibility that had fueled the gang's arrogance. What had started as a pursuit of wealth and power had ended in humiliation, arrest, and exposure. The city itself had been a battlefield, and the law had emerged victorious. For the criminals, there was no easy recovery. Trials would follow, alliances would dissolve, and reputations built on fear would crumble. Marbella, once seen as a safe haven, had proven that paradise could quickly turn into a trap. The fall of the Liverpool gangs was complete, a cautionary tale of ambition, greed, and the inevitable reach of justice. The collapse of Marbella's Liverpool gangs marked the end of an era in the city's criminal underworld. Villas that once symbolized power and wealth were now empty, their gates padlocked and interiors stripped of their contents. Streets that had once been alive with the hum of luxury cars and late-night meetings were quiet, the neon lights of nightclubs casting an eerie glow over a city that had witnessed bloodshed, betrayal, and chaos. For the men who had come from Liverpool seeking fortune and dominance, the dream had disintegrated, leaving only fear, regret, and a trail of destruction behind. The trials that followed were long and public, exposing every detail of the gang's operations to both authorities and the media. Evidence seized during the raids revealed the scale of the empire: millions of euros laundered through property deals, kilograms of cocaine shipped across Europe, and a network of loyal soldiers who had carried out violent acts on command. The betrayal that had sparked the villa ambush was also laid bare, showing how ambition and greed within the ranks had accelerated the downfall. Men who had once been feared now faced prison sentences, public scrutiny, and the collapse of their reputation. Marbella itself struggled to recover from the shadow the gangs had cast. Tourists, who had once flocked to the city for its beaches and nightlife, now read headlines about shootings, raids, and organized crime. Local businesses that had unknowingly rented properties to gang members or facilitated money laundering came under investigation, and the city's authorities had to work hard to rebuild trust with visitors and residents alike. The Golden Mile, once a playground for the rich and famous, became a cautionary tale for those who believed luxury could shield them from consequences. Despite the arrests and prosecutions, the legacy of the gangs remained. Survivors of the ambush and raids carried scars, physical and psychological, from the events that had unfolded in the hills and nightclubs of Marbella. Suspicion lingered among former allies, and whispers of revenge circulated quietly, though the reach of law enforcement kept most from acting. The city had been a proving ground for criminals, but it had also proven that no empire, no matter how far from home, could escape the consequences of its actions indefinitely. For law enforcement, the operation was a significant victory, a demonstration of international cooperation and strategic planning. Spanish and UK authorities had successfully dismantled a transnational criminal network, sending a message to gangs across Europe: ambition unchecked by loyalty, law, or morality would inevitably lead to collapse. The arrests and seizures became case studies in policing, showing how patient investigation and coordination could neutralize threats that seemed untouchable. In the end, Marbella's allure as a criminal haven was broken. The Liverpool gang's dream of ruling from sun-soaked villas, controlling shipments, and flaunting wealth had crumbled under the weight of violence, betrayal, and law enforcement. What remained was a city that had witnessed the extremes of ambition and greed and survived to tell the story. Marbella's golden beaches continued to shine, but beneath the surface, the shadow of Gangland Madness remained a warning. Paradise can become a prison, and power built on fear and crime is always fleeting. The story of Marbella's Liverpool gangs became more than a tale of violence. It became a lesson in the fragility of criminal empires, the inevitability of justice, and the consequences of carrying the streets abroad. Ambition had brought them to the sun, but betrayal and law had ensured they would never rise again.